We are in Las Vegas. We're at Mandalay Bay Convention Center. We are about to interview Pat Chun, the University of Washington Athletic Director. It'll be the first time we've had Jon Wilner, my pal here, myself, in person to interview a guest. So this is a momentous, historic occasion that you are witnessing here. Why do we want Pat Chun on this episode?
Well, also the first time Big Ten has held this event in Las Vegas, right? We want Pat Chun because, one, Washington Jed Fish, today was his day at the podium, and he and Washington's players are going to speak to the media today. But also, boy, there's so much going on in college football and college sports in general, and I think Pat Chun is able to play the seven-dimensional chess about as well as anybody can possibly play it, given all of the different developments and how they all impact everything else, right? Something that has happened on the legal front affects football scheduling, for instance. And so I'm curious to see what Pat has to say about the big picture and about the Huskies. What did they learn in the Big Ten their first year? How does he see them within the hierarchy of the Big Ten?
I'm into that. I'm into that because we've historically seen Ohio State, Michigan, now Penn State, maybe Oregon. Where is Washington on that list of teams? And, and also I want to ask him about, we watched SMU buy its way into the ACC. We saw just this week Memphis trying to buy its way into the Big 12. No success there. What does that look like in the future? Is this just what schools are going to have to do in order to get to a Power Four conference?
Great idea.
Without further ado, Pat Chun, University of Washington Athletic Director, our interview here in Las Vegas. So we are joined. This is the first time we've done a three-person interview. We've got Pat Chun. First time ever, yeah.
I got that honor.
Yes, you got that honor.
Wow, that's an honor. Yeah.
Usually we're in different spots, so it'll be fun to do it this way. You just heard your football coach talk up on the main stage here in Vegas. What did you think of Coach Fish?
Well, I think there's deserved optimism. Really, just watching Jed, being around Jed the last year and a half, two football seasons, two recruiting classes, two, just revamping the roster. Seeing, the guy is an exceptional leader, puts the work in, building culture on that team like he talked about. So, we recognize how tough our league is, but we also recognize that, hey, we're building a program here at UW, and, based on where we think we're at today, I think there's a lot of optimism on, what this year is going to has in hold for us.
He came out strong in favor of the automatic qualifier model for the CFP, and it seems like everyone in the Big Ten is very much aligned on that, where the Big Ten and SEC will get 4 bids, ACC Big 12 2. Can you kind of address the alignment internally on that issue and others?
Well, there's a lot of thought and dialogue that has gone into this, and we even had, I think Tony talked about it. We had dialogue with our friends in the Southeastern Conference. Where we landed, just from the University of Washington standpoint, is obviously we want a 16-team field. The bigger the field, we feel like helps University of Washington, but. The longer I'm in this business of college sports, the more I recognize our inability to evolve quickly has really been to our own detriment. And just the day and age of how teams are selected, really what's at stake right now. When you look at, college football's changed. You have, we're a national conference. You have 2 conferences where, it's like Jed said today, I think 3 of the last 4 teams competing for national championships are in the Big Ten right now. So it's just the whole world's changed significantly. And when you look at the 4-4-2-2-1 model, it takes a lot of the human element out of selecting what the playoff field can look like. And, I'm in the camp that's actually the right thing for the future of the sport.
What does that do to the rest of college football, though? If the message is that 4 bids for the SEC, 4 bids for the Big Ten, and hey, before the game's been played, you've got the Big 12, ACC, and the Group of 6 marginalized, and I get wanting to do what's best for yourself. I struggle with the greater good part.
Well, I would argue that there's no perfect solution. College football is inherently flawed in how it's structured. So when you start from that point and know that a selection committee simply has not worked, you end up with members of the media getting death threats. You end up meeting members of the committee getting death threats. There's a perceived subjectivity even with all the data points that are available. So at least this in the proposed model, it shrinks the work of the committee to just a few, as opposed to increasing the work of the committee, which I just don't know how that can be done in an effective way. So the committee's done an exceptional job to date, but this, in my opinion, is just another piece of how we need to continue to evolve, because I would argue, at least for the Big Ten, the SEC, and I'd argue the ACC and the Big 12, it puts more emphasis on the regular season. It makes November a little bit more impactful because more teams are involved. What makes the current model work is, as we all lived with this last year, is November was more exciting because more teams were more had a chance in the playoffs. You increase the field, you regionalize it, quote unquote, per conference. I think I'm of the belief it's going to add more excitement to the regular season, which has always been the linchpin of what makes college football so special, is how important the regular season is.
The Big Ten had executive meetings today, right? Yeah. Athletic directors were together with the commissioner. Could you take us, as best you can, inside what a Big Ten meeting is like with Tony Petitti, how it's run? I'm not going to ask you to compare to Pac-12 meetings.
Although I'd love that. I'd love to know.
Get that off the air. What is it like? What is the management style like? How does the alignment feel?
Well, I will start that there's probably, at least for the University of Washington, there's a lot of similarities within the Big Ten in types of institutions. Yeah. So that helps, I guess, a little bit in terms of the common language. I will say Tony's style is unique to himself. Okay. But what makes Tony, at least in my short time of being in this conference, is he's an exceptional communicator. But I think what differentiates him is there's a lot of ideas that come to the forefront. I think where I've been really impressed with Tony is his ideas that he brings to the table are implementable. And I think that's really where the big difference is he doesn't bring anything to the AD group where he hasn't thought it through, or he and his team haven't thought it through to a level where we can actually implement this, as opposed to coming out with these grandiose philosophical plans that may take a decade to come to fruition when the whole world's going to change in that time. So our meetings today are typical of the Big Ten. Tony does a lot of communication outside of the room. I think that's really helped the conference. I don't think, Tony, I probably have, now I serve on that implementation committee, so there's probably more phone calls, but, there's not a week that goes by where I don't get at least one or two phone calls from Tony just to talk about some of the current issues or things he's working on. And I know he talks to coaches, so he clearly understands the time investment of relationship building. He clearly values getting opinion and viewpoints from the diversity of the conference. So by the time we get to the meeting rooms, and we meet weekly still on Zoom, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of communication lines that are already open that probably lead to more productive meetings like we had today.
There are tiers in every conference, and I'd be curious to see where you see Washington right now in the Big Ten, where with revenue sharing and NIL and all the changes going on. I think it's hard to get a grasp of where does UW see itself in that conference.
Well, I grew up in this conference, as you guys know, and I've actually told when our first year in the Big Ten, the brief Big Ten education I would give all the Huskies that would listen to me is, in 1960. The Big Ten changed in 1968, and Woody Hayes had his best recruiting class, and they played the sophomores, and they won the national championship. Michigan reacted and hired Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler. 1969, Michigan upsets Ohio State in Ann Arbor. 10-year war begins, and the only two schools who have won a national championship since that point that have been member institutions are Ohio State and Michigan. Now, in that interim, Washington, Penn State, USC, Nebraska have all won national championships with members of other conferences. So you have to accept the reality that in this conference, really since the mid-'60s, it used to be called the Big Two and the Little Eight, and as the membership has changed, that number has changed to the Little Were. Now the world's changed significantly. Obviously, we have to go earn to get to the top of this conference. We recognize that, but we also recognize we bring a unique history to us. We have national championships in our history. We have a lot of conference championships in our history. We have Hall of Fame head coaches that have worn our headsets on our sidelines. We also have a very unique DMA in terms of what Seattle and the Pacific Northwest is. So our value proposition to the league is very unique to us. But I'm always confident that puts us always in the upper third of the league.
Does your position within Seattle, now that we're entering the era of revenue sharing and true NIL, you see that as kind of rocket fuel for you all?
And it has to be.
Yeah.
So that really falls on us as an athletic department and all of our staff and coaches to work into the marketplace and figure out where NIL opportunities for us. And seeing Brooks' shoes on you versus their corporate headquarters are probably less than 3 miles from our campus. So it's just an example of people think about Microsoft and Amazon and Alaska Airlines, Costco, Starbucks, Zillow. There's just a lot of opportunity in Seattle, and we recognize that we have to take advantage of what that is. But in this environment, if we actualize that, we will be well positioned.
There's SMU gets into the ACC, buying its way in with donors. You recently saw Memphis approach the Big 12. I'd be curious from the 20,000-foot view of your experience in the industry, what you make of that. Is that just what it's going to be in the future, or how do you get into a Power 4 conference?
That's a good question. I mean, the industry continues to change. I recognize the need to have a seat at one of these tables in these 4 conferences, maybe deeper than most. And I recognize the urgency that people on a local campus level will have. But, you guys know this. You guys are as educated as anybody. There are other partners that'll have to be a part of those decisions. And that's where a lot of the dollars come from. And that's really where a lot of these conversations have to happen. And, it's critically important, especially in this new environment that we're headed in, that you increase your quote unquote value as a university athletic department. And the clearest way to do that is winning football games and competing on the biggest stages and at the highest levels.
You've been on a lot of committees in the last few years. You're on the implementation committee for the House settlement. We just found out, I think yesterday, that NIL collectives are going to be part of the new era of NIL. Where do you see all this going?
Well, and this is someone who's been a part of the working group, so this will be a very biased view, but we're going to have to allow Brian Seeley and the CSC to build this new entity. Now, we're also going into leaving an environment where there were no regulations and rules to an environment where theoretically we're going to have regulations and rules. I am of the belief, or firm in the camp, we need regulations and rules. I don't know a business or an industry that can survive without it. I think there's going to be a lot of nuance to what becomes regulation or rules because of what's baked in the settlement, what gets interpreted, how the structure is with Kessler and Berman, and where they fall into this, where arbitration ends up. So this is going to be a work in progress. But I mean, going back to the old model, like if this next, what we've just tried to do, if it breaks, I don't know what happens next, because I just don't know how the past model is sustainable by any stretch of imagination. I think there's less than 10 schools that can thrive in a Cap 3, like just a total open market, which there's not a league or a sporting pro sports league, a conference, anything in the world that can survive with that.
Yeah, on that point, the NFL does well because of the parity.
Yeah.
The NBA, we just saw the Thunder and the Pacers play for the title. Are those kinds of moves necessary to get college football, to get more teams involved at the highest level, or what happens?
Well, I think that's why, we probably need to do a lot of soul searching in college football. Yeah. Like, we're all stewards of this great game. It's that one question that gets asked to the commissioners more than anybody else is, who has a responsibility for the good of the game? Well, the reality is we all do. But that's a very, very complicated question because just because the way we're structured. we're not structured in a way in which what's best for college sports always becomes a decision, because I think we've talked about it, offline about, even trying to set the right date for the transfer portal.
Yeah.
It's like we're going to sit here and complain about, players going to the portal during the playoffs, during bowl games, opt-outs during the bowl game, yet we refuse to set the portal date until after a champion gets crowned. You show me one pro league that has any player movement before a championship game. Like
it's insane.
Well, the pinnacle of the sport. Like what message are we sending to the world, to young people, to high school kids and grade school kids, that nothing should be more important than winning at the highest level, because everything that has to happen, it's because it takes more than one person. But yet here we are in college football that we can't even do a simple thing like that, right? And we make it all about, it's about competitive advantages is why we won't do it. But it's like, there comes a point where we're going to, I'm old enough, and we're all the same age where, there's a time and a place in this country where baseball was more popular than NFL.
Yeah.
But baseball isn't what baseball's a local sport now, because the NFL was smarter about how they grew their game. And man, I worry, we're the second most viewed sport, college football is right now. And I think we all have a responsibility, but and I think there's a lot of willing people to take on that responsibility, but we're not structured to activate on that responsibility.
And to be clear, UW supports a single portal in the spring.
In the springtime, for a multitude of reasons. One, we don't believe there should be player movement until a champion's crowned. We also recognize that there's an academic component to the settlement. So with this progress toward degrees, so having a young person sit on your campus for a whole year is actually a good thing. Also, you want to be able to, in this environment, you have to re-recruit your own team.
Yeah.
Why not reward the coaches that do a better job of identifying and recruiting and signing high school players, getting them into your environment, and then letting them don't have the system in place that pressurizes them in December or January to have to make a decision, because freshman year is so hard for anybody, whether you're an athlete or not an athlete. Third thing is we need roster stability, and the NFL declaration dates falls into the third week of January. So you have all these reasons why, and then we have a quarters and semesters. So April seemed to be the most compromised date to do it. But like anything, we talk about we can't do spring football. I need to develop my team. But it goes back to we've been so slow to change. We have to recognize we have a new system, new environment. We need to adapt or even think ahead of it. But that's kind of where college sports in general just lags.
Who's pushing against just moving it to the spring? Where's the biggest opposition?
I think the Big Ten may be on an island on this one at this point. So, we've talked about it. We talked about an implementation. I think we were there as a committee, but once the spring meetings happened, competitive, the competitive nature of our industry, you could see why some leagues may want the Big Ten or the SEC, why their advantage with the January portal, because whether you're in a 4-4-2-2-1-1 model or not, you're going to have a glut of Big Ten and SEC teams in the playoff, and disruption of their roster is actually a good thing for maybe a couple of the other leagues, but that's not the right thing to do. We should never put ourselves in a position where the Penn State kid has to go decide I want to go in the portal because the system is forcing me to do it. So
Big Ten's on a couple of islands, it seems like.
Yeah, it is.
What did Washington learn first year in the Big Ten? And not just necessarily football or men's basketball. Is there something that came up with your Olympic sports, or the way you're going about the administrative side and the business side?
I was surprised at the end of the year I was expecting a lot of negative feedback from our student athletes about the travel. And it was by and large positive. That was a surprise to me. Now the grind is real. Our athletes need to be in recovery, and lack of sleep is a key part of that. So that was probably the biggest surprise to me. Is it goes back to student athletes want to compete on the biggest stages. The Big Ten, by and large, and most sports provides those biggest stages. That was probably the biggest surprise. This league, maybe from an earlier question, is this league is very aligned.
Yes.
And then, like I said, we've had, there are a lot of candid conversations in this last league, and having been a part of a conference that wasn't aligned, that exists today, but in a very different format than what it used to be. You have to it's such a hard, like I said, we're not the business of college athletics is not structured correctly. So it's critically important that at least in your conference setting, now with 18 schools, you have to have some level of alignment in there. And I think the nice thing is the Big Ten is aligned. And I think it also helps that you're sitting on top, at least from a financial standpoint, on top of the food chain. So that makes alignment a lot easier because there's one thing you can't complain about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. What causes that alignment? But when you've got the money to glue it together, it helps. Everybody's a little happier in the room.
Because being in a league in which you're looking up at dollars as opposed to saying, all right, how do we, it was always, being in that old league was about catching up, which was never going to happen. Now with Tony, it's, hey, how do we steward these dollars, but how do we keep growing the Big Ten? And those are fascinating conversations to be a part of.
Well, thanks a ton, right? I mean, this has been awesome. Covered a lot of ground.
Do I get some memento?
Yeah, we get you a T-shirt for being the first in-person, 3-person interview.
Okay. Got any ideas how we could get a T-shirt?
Hopefully we'll send that over to you. We'll send that over to you. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah,
really appreciate you. Really, look, I'm glad we got him. He's here in Vegas. Interesting comments about the travel. But what'd you think?
Yeah, I think we covered a ton of ground because there's a ton of ground to cover, right? Washington stuff, Big Ten, national stuff. There's so much going on. And, Pat's got a great perspective on this stuff, not only from his experience as an AD specifically in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, but he's on a lot of these key committees, right? So he was on the transformation committee that tried to create a new constitution for the NCAA. He's now on the implementation committee from the House settlement. So he can connect all the dots. And the way college sports is now, everything is interconnected. And the decision that a committee makes affects all the conferences. A decision the Big Ten makes affects all the conferences. And it's just good to get his perspective on all the different issues.
I think you could tell he wanted to talk about the portal window.
Yeah.
That was important to him because I'm always interested to see where the guest steers the conversation. But he steered into that. He was like, hey, before we go, I need to talk about the window. That is important to Washington, you can tell, and important to the Big Ten. And your point about them being on an island, they're on an island with the automatic qualifiers. They're on an island with the transfer portal window. How do you think that's all going to shake out?
Boy, I don't know. The portal window, I think, is a little bit more complicated in terms of the stakeholders, so to speak. But the CFP, it is basically just the Big Ten and the SEC. And Tony Petitti made that clear yesterday. And they got to find common ground at some point. And if they don't by December 1st, then the current model of 12 teams is going to be in place for the 2026 season. I don't know what's going to happen, to be honest with you. Is there a door number 3 where they can come up with a compromise that doesn't currently exist in public, at least? I don't know. It's fascinating that these two conferences have the authority to shape the momentous event that is the playoff, and they can't agree.
And he alluded to this idea that you can only control what's in your conference. You can't control the larger system. I think they're butting up against that a little bit because they would like very much to have everybody go, yes, this 4-4 model for the SEC and the Big Ten is the best thing ever. But if I'm the Big 12 and ACC, I'm not on board with that. And it feels to me a little bit like the Big Ten's trying to push the SEC into a 9-game conference schedule. And I'm wondering, do they really want the 4 teams, or do they want just the SEC to be in a 9-game conference schedule so that they're judged equally? And did you agree with his point about the committee and the human element? I don't really.
I've been a big critic of the committee, and so I think generally speaking, for both football and the men's basketball tournament, the committees have got issues, real issues. We saw one with Bubba Cunningham, North Carolina's AD. Getting a big bonus because Carolina made the tournament and they were a controversial addition. I do think that there is a flaw in the current process, and the biggest problem is it undermines public trust in the event itself, and that is the slippery slope for college football going out into the future.
But how do you feel about 4 automatics? For each of the 2 conferences that already have all these advantages? They're going to get the teams in anyway. I get the point, though, that it creates this November where a bunch of 6 and 3 teams feel like they have a chance to play. It's good for Fox. It's good for the TV partners. But I don't think it's good for the greater good.
It also works for September because it would open up marquee non-conference games, because Washington would not be afraid of playing Georgia if the result didn't impact its ability to get into the playoff. And so that's also part of the Big Ten's push. They want to assess or create a crossover series with the SEC. They're not going to do that if it's a 5+11 where the selection committee has so much authority and the SEC is playing one fewer conference game.
Yeah, well,
it's a mess wrapped up in a bigger mess.
There you go. Well, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to the audio podcast of this, hit that subscribe button as well. We'll be back next week with an all-new episode.
Thanks, everybody.